Oh, well, 4 cups of honey to the rest water.
Right.
So
And-
1 quart of honey and 3 quarts of tea or
Water.
And so would you heat the tea and melt the honey into that in the same,
Mhm.
all together?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I would tend to do.
But if
Yeah.
you're doing 3, you can just melt the honey in 1 cup, with 1 cup of water and then mix it with the tea, is that what that means, or is it just all in one pot?
Yeah, it can be all in one pot. Yeah. No matter what, you can just once you get that water to the heat level that you prefer, then you can just add the honey into it, the water or the tea, and then put it into your brewing container. And normally I would automatically put the airlock on right away. Like a lot of books you'll read, you can just put like a cloth over it and just let it be like that for like a few days to a week or something before a lot of the alcohol has been created. But just to be on the safe side, yeah, I tend to just put the airlock on there right
So you
away.
let it cool down to 90 degrees and then you put the airlock on it and let it sit for.
Yeah, and put the
how long?
culture in there, either directly or like I was saying, like ideally primed a little bit with some of your sweet liquid in a like 1 cup mason jar or something with the culture on it for like about 15 minutes and then pour it into the main amount.
So you don't have to leave it open for the fermentation process, 'cause
You don't wanna leave it open.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Alright, so then,
Mark, can I
yeah,
just
okay.
put something out and just
Okay.
like, cause it's probably good to go through that little step-by-step process a couple times or in different ways, but I think it's really, the crucial thing is to get the temperature of your tea down to a cooler level before you put the honey in.
Yeah.
In that
Okay.
program. So if you, like, maybe make a OSHA or ginger and you boil that for half an hour or 45 minutes, that water's really, really hot. And if you've got your 3 quarts of water, like granted none of it boiled off, but some of it probably steamed off or something like that. But if it's really hot, it's nice to add a little cold water. So I kind of recommend starting with 2 quarts of water, half a gallon of water, and make that your tea. And then add a little bit of the cooler water to bring that temperature down, so that it's right around that yeast pitching, or to the honey adding stage, so that it's not too hot for the honey. Otherwise, I found I've spent a lot of time waiting and waiting and waiting.
Well, another thing to do with that,
Yeah.
if you wanna bring it down, is to put the pot into a sink and then surround it with cold water,
Yeah,
which is
fits, yeah.
something that I tend to do, if it fits. Or put it out on the porch if it's winter time and come back and do it in the morning, is another thing, so, yeah, there's all sorts of ways, as far as that goes, but, yeah, if you're in a rush, then you can just make like basically a concentrate of hot liquid and then add cold liquid in order to bring it down. I mean, I guess my tendency is really to aim for sterility, in to whatever degree, and so once I have it like hot, then I don't wanna add like, new water into that, But I've certainly had really amazing things that have made in all different ways, whether it's even heated up to like I said, 100 degrees, just warm enough to get that honey to like mix in there, and not even fully mix, and it can still be good.
So is there a range for yeast temperature, for the yeast to continue?
Yeah,
to
it
work, or
really
is
doesn't
90
like it
degrees?
above 100, and it's
Yeah.
definitely more happy at 90, and
90.
then most of the cultures don't like it below 60. So 60 to 80, like room temperature that you're comfortable in, is really like super prime. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up another one. This is one that I made with Daniel Nicholson, who's a local wonderkin and brewer and plant person and friend of our friend Frank Cook.
While the meat is brewing, do you keep it above 60 degrees all the time?
Yeah, ideally you would, because it really slows down even at 60 degrees, and it might stop,
Well,
and then like you'll just end up with something that's sweet, which can be fine too. And we have like a couple sweet things to try. This is Osha Ponderosa that we made. Osha is from Halo, the local medicinal collective in the area, and the Ponderosa is from Daniel's Land, from a class that we did there, similar to this one.
So what's an ideal temperature to keep your meat at?
I would say 75
75?
would be ideal.
For
Yeah.
fermenting, if you can keep, you wanna keep it that long for that process, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, and so that kind of like when I was saying, it could take 3 weeks to, 2 months, like, part of that is how much sweetness is in there, and part of it is how warm it is. And so it might go twice as fast at 75 as it would at 65, as far as the, just kind of like us, we slow down in the winter too, right? When we're cold, we don't move as fast or work as hard oftentimes, and it's pretty much the same for the organism that's gonna be making your mead.
Cause there's no place, like in my house, it's consistently 75 degrees.
Okay, so this gets into, you've got your ambient room temperature, right? But then you also have putting a jacket around it, putting a sleeping bag around it, putting a blanket around it, putting it up high, following the physics of heat rises, So if you have a loft or an attic or whatever. And then, I mean, our friend Grant, who's another brewer in the area around Asheville, kind of half jokes about dressing up your mead, like right now I have this really cool
Put your
jacket
jacket on,
that on my mead, and like, or, if it's an aphrodisiac mead, like putting, like some blanket with hearts on it, around it, just kind of like putting that extra level of intention into it, if it's, something for your sweetie, then you like put like one of her or his, clothing articles around it, just so that every time you see that, you're like, oh, I'm making this for my sweetie, and it kind of just instills that energy in there, so, yeah, there's lots of levels around the practicality of keeping it to the temperature that you want, and then there's the energetics as well of like dressing up your meads, or wines or other brews.
Do you
Um,
have to the temperature?
Yeah, so ideal is around 70, 75. It really pretty much drops off at
Yeah.
below 60, and it really doesn't like to work much above 90,
Cold, cold and all that,
Yeah, so if you think about the temperature you're comfortable in, that's the temperature that meat's gonna be comfortable in as well.
Is
And
it?
if you get them going, they'll make their own heat. So,
Yeah,
like, if you
as
put
well.
in that towel, or like I always just have like sweaters I pull over them, and I like to think that they're gonna get working, and you do that right away when it's already hot from just being made, and you put that sweater on it right away, and then the yeast starts working, and within a few days, they're working and they're creating their own heat inside of the vessel, and you're keeping it trapped inside. It's really.
I did that first time I made pear wine. I didn't know anything about it, but I put a heating pad in between the two bottles, and it seemed to do it just, and it
Yeah,
came out
and
very
that-
clear too.
A lot of pine, huh?
Yeah.
And you got a little bit of the OSHA, and then this would be an example of something that's got a little bit of residual sweetness in it, but not like a whole lot. For some reason, pretty much all the commercial meads are really sweet, like this
They are.
dirty,
Very sweet.
I don't know why that is, because that's certainly not, a function of how mead has to be. Like so many people say, I don't like mead, it's syrupy sweet and
It might be
whatnot.
expectation of the.
Right.
And I think those are some of the
Honey
old
wine.
styles, like they're
Yeah.
kind of honoring, this Nordic tradition of sweet honey wines, but, this has been made in India and Egypt and, everywhere in between, and definitely it can be just as dry as the driest Pinot Grigio or,
Yeah. That's cool.
you name it.
Is it important to keep it cool if it's a really hot summer week or something?
Yeah, it can definitely tend to go off with the flavors, once again, above 90 especially. Like I've
Yeah.
done some brewing and had friends do brewing in Florida, for instance, in the summer, and yeah.
Do you
It
have
doesn't
any
really like it there.
recommendations for that?
Basement.
Fan?
Basement, yeah,
Yeah.
or even just
Under
like
the
in the
house.
ground,
Yeah.
like to dig, like how they do it in Florida, is they have a pit, in the ground
That's
on the
cool.
north face of a building,
Cool, okay.
and so then the ground moderates the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
All the cave.
Yeah, a cave, exactly, would be ideal. Our friend Patrick Ironwood, who's kind of like a progenitor to this process for a lot of the people in Asheville, and he has an actual cave like that in Tennessee that he uses for sure. That's a good one.
You get
All right, so we've gotten into the carboy, the airlock, we talked about the hydrometer, and that's, most of the stuff that you're basically going to use in the initial crafting phase of doing the mead. And, I guess the other thing that we could talk about, let me see here, just to go through the process. there's the different types of yeast, and I've mentioned those. So going to that second page, most people started out in Asheville using champagne exclusively, and I did that for years. There's a culture that says champagne on it. And that one will make a whole lot of alcohol, but it also makes it super dry. And I've experienced that it tends to kind of drive off the more subtle flavors that that you would get from whatever you're adding to it. And so I've kind of moved away from doing that. And one thing that was introduced to our scene through Turtle was this one called D47, which is actually the one that is in this one that we're tasting right now. And I really like D47. One thing that I've noticed is that it has a very particular flavor unto itself. And so I was like brewing a whole lot with D47 and a whole lot of various different brews with like pretty distinctly different ingredients tasted kind of similar, you know? So I've kind of started to branch out from that, but like I said, D47 has a really good flavor itself, and it's pretty strong. I've also noticed that it will cut out like around 12% sometimes alcohol, so like even 4 cups sometimes it'll be ending up a little bit sweet if you add 4 cups per gallon ratio. Versus some things that can go up higher. I've already mentioned the EC 1118, which is a more lower temperature one, and then there's one called Montrachet, which is really a popular one for wines that are of a big bodied character like Merlots and Cabs and that sort of thing. So I tend to use Montrachet for like blueberries and other similar dark fruits that have like a lot of robust flavor. So that's the whole.
Montrachet.
What does that package look like?
It's red. It's by Red Star and it's red. But the thing that I'm noticing is Lavlin, they have like all these like weird names that I've mentioned, some EC 1118 or D47 or KV 1116, but actually those correspond to these names like a champagne yeast or a Montrachet. I haven't quite gotten that code in my mind, but I think that some of it's in their brochure back there.
How
And
much blueberries or blackberries do you want to add to that?
okay, that's a really good
Well,
question.
I just wanna finish up with that, and those names are regional, like Champagne is from the Champagne region, that's where that yeast comes from, and same with Montrachet or what have you. And so I think that those 1118 or whatever is a Montrachet type yeast, so it's
Yeah, for sure.
from that original body from that region or whatever, but they've maybe worked with it and hybrid, whatever, bred it to do whatever it is.
Yeah, and I mean, so, yeah, it's interesting, you get kind of into the minutia of this stuff because you can see like a similarity with, fruits, for instance, like there's like different yellow delicious or different red delicious, depending on the region where it's grown, and, certainly with the cultures as well, like you basically can devise your own culture eventually, by what you add to it. For instance, if you didn't want to go to the store, or the bottom drops out after 12/21/2012, and you still want to have alcohol, like once you move your alcohol into your secondary container off that first container, there's this stuff that I was saying is called shrub, which is basically made up of the bodies of these microbes, and you could literally just pour more sweet liquid onto that shrub, and they will wake back up and they'll make more alcohol. And what I noticed, the most profound experience I had with that was I made a cherry raspberry mead and had like this much amount of shrub, and then just poured straight honey water on top of that shrub, rebrewed it, and then bottled it, and it tasted like cherries and raspberries without any cherry and raspberry other than like this little sediment that was in the bottom. Trub, T-R-U-B, T-R-U-B. So, if you like were to keep this, and I haven't worked with it too much, like sometimes I'll put in a jar and put it in the refrigerator and then use it. But basically that's what they're doing with these packets, is that they're just like drying that stuff out, dehydrating it and then packaging it and selling it. This is also what's called brewer's yeast, right? So there's lots of vitamins and minerals in there. Not only is this beneficial microbe to make alcohol, but there are nutrients in there. They're even sold in stores as well. So we've gotten into like, exactly, we've gotten into making baked goods with it. We have this whole song that we sing at the mead circles called Trub Muffin. And so yeah, this is like, if nothing else, definitely don't throw it down the drain, it's good microbes for your compost too. you know, probiotic. So that's like really good stuff. It's by no means a like waste product, you know, it's something that is kind of its own value to
So you
think about.
use it for baking?
I haven't, but I think
Yeah.
in theory you could. Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that would definitely be possible. And like back in the day, it was much more versatile. You know, they didn't have Montpellier and Montrachet
yeast,
and
yeah.
Champagne and whatever, so they would use their baking yeast kind of interchangeably. And the only thing is that these are really more geared towards making a lot of alcohol, 10, 12, like Champagne will go up 16, 17%. And the bread ones are gonna do more like a few percent, you know, more on the order of beer or cider or that, you know, sort of thing. So we're talking about adding your fruits, and like I would tend to add fruits in a ratio of about a quart, kind of like the honey per gallon, you know. So like if I'm gonna do a fruit one, I would tend to actually make a bigger batch typically and do like 5 gallons or 6 gallons and have at the minimum 5 gallons of liquid and 1 gallon of fruit. But ideally maybe more like 4 gallons of liquid and 1 gallon of fruit. And as I was saying earlier, I would leave the fruit in there for a while, for like a few weeks, because it doesn't seem like you can really get all that the fruit has to give by just heating it up for like an hour or even leaving it overnight. And then another thing that people have gotten into lately is to make like a mead, you know, just like a straight honey wine or a tea or whatever, and then in your secondary, put it onto fruit. And so that's something else that I haven't really played around with, but a number of people are really kind of getting into that. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I do. I really like to do it that way, and in some ways wouldn't think of doing it any other way, because with the fruits, like especially like blueberries or something like that, there's a lot of the esters, the fruit esters, and that's what that flavor is. And I've noticed, especially if you have a champagne yeast or something that's really vigorous, you can run off a lot of that subtle blueberry flavor if it's in that initial fermentation phase, when the gases are coming off and it's bubbling, those evaporate. And so adding it into the secondary is really nice, because then that flavor just sort of sits in there and it seeps out into the brew.
And you had juice or whole fruit?
You can do either or, you
Yeah,
know.
either or. The one thing I would really warn is that you've gotta be really careful at that point to pasteurize the fruit. Like I've run into problems where I added it to a 5-gallon batch, and I added the fruit in at the secondary stage, and the yeast isn't really strong enough to like dominate. And so what I ended up doing is I was adding errant yeast, and so it's really important, because what I would do is I would harvest blueberries from the wild and I would freeze them, and then whenever I needed it, I would just add it into that mead like that. But because they were frozen, you know, it was really hard to get it hot enough to pasteurize. Like I dropped them in the pot with the water and I heated them up, and I thought that I had them in there long enough or something, you know what I mean? So just be really careful to pasteurize them.
Well, if you heat up a blueberry or any fruit, it changes the flavor. Like I've been working with beets, you know, and they're totally different raw, so trying to grate them and just use raw beet juice, you know, because any time you heat it up, it tastes different.
That's
and
true.
the same with any
Yeah.
fruit. So
Yeah.
if there's a way to actually get the raw juice flavor,
Yeah.
that's like difficult, it seems like.
Yeah, well, it can be, and it just, you know, it all depends on where you're getting it from. I mean, certainly, for instance, at its most classic, grapes, you don't add like anything like this. You crush up the grapes,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
they just ferment of their own accord. There's that bloom, the white, like kind of cast on the outside of the fruit that will make that fermentation happen. You know, it's just waiting for access to the sugars that are on the other side of that skin.
But what I do is, because you take a chance of having a wild,
Errant.
yeah, I add an aggressive yeast to it as well to just tame it down, because immediately it starts fermenting the minute you know.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot
So-
of brewers will do that as well, as add like an intentional one that they know the flavor of, they know the ability of it to convert sugar into alcohol. And kind of what you're, I think, alluding to is that there is a middle path, and I've done that more with cider, because apples, blueberries, and other fruits also have this culture just co-occurring on the skin, ready to make alcohol, so you can just have it be raw, but then put something on top of it too. And these are so aggressive and strong that they're going to like lead the way,
Okay.
and you'll still have a little bit of that wild aspect to
Uh-huh.
it as well. And I think that's a lot easier to do with some fruits than others, you know. But I definitely haven't played around with it all
So,
that much.
Just to finish that thought, if you add the blueberries at the time, at the first stage instead of the second, then it's okay if it's frozen? Or you don't have
No,
to
I think
heat
it would be,
up?
we'd be back to like put them in the tea.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Like
And
we
get
make
them
them
to
in the tea
150.
or what have you, like however you incorporate your tea or your ginger or whatever. But I think the difference is that when, like you said, when you add the yeast, this packet of yeast, you're gonna dominate the environment. And so even if something slipped through, you're more likely to not have a problem.
Yeah.
Because the yeast packet you put in there is gonna win. But after this, by secondary, it's weaker, it's not as strong perhaps, or vibrant, which is what you want, that's why we're waiting, so that it doesn't just evaporate the stuff out. But, if there's a yeast on it, it's gonna come in there and it's gonna do something weird.
So does it need to go to 150 on the secondary to fill in with that? To 150 degrees, or what's the temperature?
I usually shoot for like 112 or something, is that what pasteurizing?
No, it's 160 technically, but 150, most of the stuff is gone, you know, the vast majority. And once again, if you add one of these cultures, then they're super strong, you know, so if you give them a leg up, even if there's other stuff occurring in there and it's not all gone, they're definitely gonna win, you know, because that's what they've been bred for.
But if
You're
you're
not gonna add
adding
that to a second ferment, you're not gonna add more yeast into the second.
No, not necessarily. So the second one, I would, once again, heat it up to, you know, 150, 160, but this is still gonna be there in the second
Right.
ferment, so they're gonna like hold their turf, you know, and, that's the kind of idea with probiotics also in our bodies, right? So, you know, you can just heat it up a little bit and play around with it. I think there's a pretty wide tolerance level to come up with a good finished product, you know, and I tend to be more absolutist just because I just put so much investment of time and energy and effort into this that I just heat it up, and it does change the flavor, but it also guarantees that it's going to be like a flavor that doesn't have off stuff like on the side of it. But you know, that being said, like I've had great things that haven't been heated up hardly at all, you know, so it's just a little bit more rolling the
So
dice.
could you make it without a yeast if the blueberries would have wild yeast on it?
Very much so.
How would you go about doing that?
You would basically crush out the blueberries and then add honey water to it and not heat it up past, you know, probably even 90. You know, if you really wanted that culture that's naturally occurring on there to make it through the process.
You would
And
just crush the blueberries with the.
in the food
water.
processor, blender, or with a potato masher at the most simple, but
And then
you know, any
strain
way
it.
that you can think about. You can strain it or not, you know, I think that,
Just like a process.
yeah, I mean, to really get the flavor though, I think it's helpful to have the whole fruit. Please keep in touch, you know, my, contact information is on there, so if you got any questions,
Okay. Should I just leave this? over
sure,
there?
that'd be great, I appreciate it, thank
Thank
you
you
very
so
much.
much.
Yeah,
I
likewise.
wish I could stay. Have
Yeah,
fun.
me too, alright, well,
Can you,
yeah,
can you just, I haven't brewed anything, so I'm
Uh-huh.
not quite sure like what the primary or the secondary,
Uh-huh.
what that means.
okay,
Can you
great,
explain
well,
that?
that's a good place to take it, other than having another meeting. So, this one is, Pear OSHA Toyon, so,
Nice.
local stuff from this area. Once again, the OSHA's from Halo, and then, the Toyon is from Kathy Cavill's place, actually. I'm sure some of you have heard of her, famous herbalist from this area. And then, Pear's just from the co-op, Stark Crimson. So this is gonna be a little bit sweeter, like a 3%. It's actually not done, but it kinda stopped fermenting because I think it got too cold. It's also in a legacy bottle from our friend Frank Cook, who we're here honoring this weekend, and a beer that he made that we'll actually sample some of maybe in a little while here. So that's kind of like doubled over.
So did you
Little
just
bit.
start this week then?
No,
If
no,
it was-
no, I started it in, I think November. It's labeled though.
Oh.
Yeah,
So you were
so it's
here-
still pretty young.
So you were here.
Oh,
then also?
nice, yeah, playing with the numbers.
Bottle 3,
112211. Yeah. Great, so let's talk about the primary and secondary, okay? So the primary is the first thing that you put your sweet liquid into.